You're listening to Rewriting the Rules, the podcast that dares to go deeper than training. I'm Bethany Bell, creator of the Canine Dialogue Dynamics Method, and this is where behaviour meets relationship, science meets the soul, and obedience takes a backseat to understanding. Let's change the conversation. Welcome back to Rewriting the Rules, a podcast for dog lovers and professionals who know deep down there's more to life with dogs than obedience, commands, or clever techniques. I'm someone who believes that dogs are not just projects to be fixed, but beings to be heard. And today we're diving into a simple but powerful truth. Your dog is not a behaviour. They're not a reactivity case, not a counter surfer, a lead puller, aggressive, stubborn, or dominant. And how often are these the first words we use to describe our dogs? And it's understandable. We've been conditioned to see dogs as bundles of behaviours, things that need managing or modifying. Even in kind reward-based circles, the lens is still behaviour-focused. But what if that lens is just a bit too narrow? What if every time we reduce a dog to a behaviour, we stop ourselves from understanding them? Today's episode is an invitation to pause and see differently, and to reconnect with the whole dog behind the behaviour. Somewhere along the way, we started to reduce dogs to the way they behave. He's reactive, she's anxious, he guards food, she's aggressive with other dogs. And these descriptions may feel useful and even necessary, but the problem is they're not the whole picture. And when a behaviour becomes the sole label and the label becomes the identity, we start to forget everything else. Who the dog is, what they've experienced, what they're feeling, and what they're trying to communicate. Instead, we begin to relate to the problem and not the being inside the dog. And this is what is called the reduction trap, a pattern we fall into, often with the best intentions. Behaviour is visible, so it draws our attention. But visibility doesn't mean simplicity. And when we focus on the outward, the barking, the lunging, the destruction, the hesitation, we risk ignoring the entire inner world that led to it. But what if we started to treat behaviour as communication? Because that's what it is. It's not a failure. It's not a performance to be judged. It's not as something that needs fixing just because it doesn't fit our expectations. But as a message, a signal, and a form of expression. Barking may be fear, or boredom, frustration, joy and happiness. Lunging may be confusion, over-arousal. Growling might be a boundary finally being spoken out loud. Even avoidance, looking away, sniffing the ground, moving behind you, can be a whisper that says, I don't feel safe right now. This doesn't mean we don't help dogs change. We do. But we change through understanding and not suppression. We begin by asking, well, what is my dog feeling? What are they trying to say? What are they needing from me in this moment? And when we've heard the answer, like truly heard it, then we can begin to respond appropriately. That response is not correction, it's not a cue or a command, but it's part of an ongoing conversation rooted in trust, empathy, and emotional connection. It's a completely different way of seeing. And when we see our dogs as just anxious or stubborn or aggressive, we reduce a living, feeling being to just one word diagnosis. But your dog is not a diagnosis. They are a whole personality with context and history, relationships, and reasons for everything they do. So we don't rush to label. We pause, observe, and seek out the why. Imagine every time you were tired or sad and someone just labelled you as difficult or broken, it would likely make you shut down. And that's exactly what happens to many dogs in traditional behaviour models. But what we see, the barking and the jumping, the biting, is only the symptom. Underneath are the layers of emotional needs, unmet instinct, trauma, communication gaps, developmental changes. We don't just fix what's above the surface. We go underneath and gently with curiosity, because the goal isn't to control, it's to understand and connect. And when connection is strong, behaviour will shift naturally without needing to be forced. So instead of fixing the problem, we start supporting the emotion. Instead of teaching obedience, we foster communication. Instead of using the 4 quadrants, we use relationship and trust. Too many methods are focused on the output. We're so focused on output, we miss what's going on. But in the CDD method, we're focused on the input. what's going into the relationship, the emotional world of the dog. And from there, the output will take care of itself. If we replace what's wrong with my dog with what are they going through, and we replace how do I stop this with what do they need from me right now, or we replace how do I train this out of them to how do I talk them through this, then we start to change the entire picture of how we see dogs and how they understand us. Your dog isn't trying to misbehave. They're just trying to be heard. So next time your dog does something that puzzles you or frustrates you, just pause and ask, what if this is communication? What if this is a need? What if this is not my fault, but it's a feeling? You might find a different answer than the one you expected. And through that answer, a whole new relationship can begin. But I want to be clear, it's not about never using the word reactive or anxious or fearful. Sometimes these words are helpful shortcuts to when we're trying to explain something. They give us a way of communication and they can help us connect with others going through something similar. But they're only helpful if we remember that they are not the full story. A label is a doorway, not a definition. It's not bad to say, my dog's reactive or my dog's anxious. What matters is that we go deeper and we ask, what does that actually mean for my dog? What are they reacting to? What's their emotional state? And what do they need right now? The danger is really when the label becomes the lens we view everything through, when it becomes a ceiling on our compassion or curiosity. If we reduce them to the label, we stop seeing the dog in front of us. But if we let the label be a starting point, we can begin to really listen and to understand the why behind the what. Maybe next time your dog barks at another dog or freezes in the doorway, or maybe they just seem too much or too sensitive. Maybe then we can just pause. We don't correct, we don't label, but we listen. And we just wonder what their body and emotions might be trying to say. And that helps us to observe, support, and to join the conversation rather than shut it down. And that's what rewriting the rules is really about. It's rewriting the current limitation of a dog's cognition and intelligence and understanding and capability. It's not just changing how we respond, but changing how we see our dogs, replacing judgment with curiosity and control with compassion, replacing training with teaching together. Well, let's take a look at what the label doesn't see. And I'm going to talk about a personal story of mine because it's very relevant. I've been labelled difficult before in my past. Not by people who knew me very well, but by those who didn't take the time to understand what was going on beneath the surface. And that label was difficult. And it implied that I was the problem, that I was hard work, that I didn't fit neatly into the box they expected me to. But the truth was that I was just overwhelmed and I was hurting. I was trying to find a way to express something that didn't have an easy outlet. And being labelled like that didn't make me feel supported. It made me feel small and silenced, like my needs were just an inconvenience. The label didn't invite curiosity. It invited correction. It narrowed who I was to a handful of behaviours without even asking why they were there in the first place. And I think that's why I feel so strongly about the way we speak about dogs who struggle, because reactive so often carries that same weight. It implies they're explosive, hard work, that they need fixing. But more often than not, they're simply misunderstood. They're simply feeling too much and they don't know how to express it safely. Or they've tried to communicate it in quieter ways, but nobody listened, so they raised their voice. And if we're not careful, the label doesn't lead to understanding. It leads to management, suppression, avoidance, and shame. So instead of narrowing our lens with a label, we can open it up with a question. What's underneath that behaviour? Because when someone finally asked me that, when someone finally chose to see me beneath the label, everything started to change. And the thing is, even if a dog doesn't understand the full meaning of the word reactive or aggressive or difficult, they absolutely feel the impact of how we carry those labels. Because labels don't just describe behaviour, they shape our responses to it. When we start to believe the label at face value, when we internalize it as truth, we begin to approach that dog differently. We might become more cautious, more controlling, more distant, or more frustrated. We might stop offering as many choices. We might begin to anticipate problems before they even arise. We might look at the dog and see a challenge rather than a conversation waiting to be understood. And all of that changes the energy between us. It changes our body language and it changes our tone. It changes the opportunities that we give and the freedoms that we allow. The dog may not know the word, but they know the feeling. They feel that shift in us, the wariness and the tension. They feel the disconnection. And slowly they begin to live under that label, even if they were never truly meant to carry it. But what happens when we let go of that label? When we replace it with curiosity, compassion, and a willingness to see more? Then that's when something incredible will start to shift, because we start to soften, we open, we begin to relate again, rather than manage. And in that space, healing starts to happen. And I want to just leave you with a few questions, just to gently sit with, not to analyze or judge, but just to simply notice. Have you ever looked at your dog and unknowingly filtered their behaviour through a label that you've heard or used? How does the label make you feel about them? Does it shape the way that you respond? And what might happen if you just set that label aside just for a moment and look through the lens of their emotions, their needs, their story? Have you ever been labelled yourself, misunderstood, misjudged, or reduced to a version of yourself that didn't tell the whole truth? And if so, how did that change the way others treated you? And how did it make you feel? We don't need perfect answers to this, just gentle awareness. Because sometimes the smallest shift in our perception leads to the biggest shift in our connection. And I remember a time when one of my own dogs would bark at me, what some would call demand barking, and it felt relentless. It grated on me, and I found myself getting irritated, and I labelled him as being difficult and demanding. I asked myself if I'd reinforced this behaviour somehow. Maybe it was my fault. And the more I labelled him, the more I distanced myself from what he was actually saying. Until one day I heard my own voice back. I noticed how my tone had changed, how my frustration was bleeding into our connection, and I felt ashamed. So I paused, and I stopped trying to manage the behaviour, and I looked at him, and I asked, what do you need? Not how do I make this stop? Not how do I fix this? But what's missing right now? And when I removed that label, I saw the need. He was overwhelmed, maybe understimulated, maybe uncertain, maybe seeking connection. And as I began to meet those needs, his barking softened, not because I trained it out of him, but because he was finally heard. And I realized that the label hadn't just shaped the way I saw him, it shaped the way I treated him. So as we come to the end of today's episode, I hope you're leaving with a deeper awareness of just how powerful labels can be. Not because our dogs understand the words themselves, but because of the meaning we attach to them and how that meaning shapes our tone, our expectations, and our responses. It's not about policing language or never using shorthand. Sometimes reactive or anxious is the only way we can find the words. But when we pause to look beneath the label, when we ask what that word is really trying to describe, we begin to understand the dog in front of us, their needs, their fears, their longings, and we get the chance to respond to them from a place of understanding and not assumption. Because when we change our perspective, we change the relationship. And when we change the relationship, everything else can start to shift too. So thank you for joining me today. If this resonates with you, if something stirred, I'd love for you to explore the free resources I mentioned in episode 1. There's a whole world opening up for you and your dog, and I'd be honoured to walk that path with you. Next week, we're going to talk about something that's really close to my heart, the nervous system and behaviour, and why calm isn't a cue, and it might just change the way you see everything. So until then, go gently with your dog, with yourself, with the journey. You're doing much better than you think. See you next time.